Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on what time you're viewing this podcast. We've titled Race, Culture, and the Church. Race, Culture, and the Church. And I am pleased. I am pleased. Someone I consider not only a co-laborer as we both work for the Salvation Army locally. We serve on the advisory council. But the dean of the School of Education, California State University, Sacramento, Dr. Alexander M. Sasha Sidorkin, welcome in.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I am glad you are here. And just for background, I met Sasha. I was invited to serve on the advisory council with the Salvation Army, as has Sasha much longer than I have. And we served on and still serve on the same, what we call the Community Impact Committee. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I really want to get to know even more. I think I know a little bit, but for our audience too, to really get to know, it's important to know people in high places. When you have the dean of the School of Education at a major institution in California, that's a good thing. So for those aspiring to obtain their PhD in education, it's the man to know. Sasha, boy, oh boy, if I read your resume, it would take pretty much, it would be a long time. But one of the things that we were joking prior to hitting record on this podcast is you've obtained two PhDs. What's underachiever you? Education, for someone... Again, two PhDs, a whole list of accomplishments in the educational field. Grew up in Western Siberia.
Yeah.
Education was foundational. It sounds like, I'm going on a limb here, was foundational to your upbringing. How was that instilled in you at the Sidorkin household? Was that just a default, or was that something your parents, grandparents said, no, education's key?
Well, my brother and I are first generation in college, so both my parents come from a rural, really peasant background in Siberia. They migrated to the big city in mid-50s. And for them, that was always like, oh, you're going to go to college, And I really didn't understand what's the big deal about that. I mean, because of course I'm going to go to college. So it wasn't ever questioned in our family. So my brother is a little older. He was first, and then I came as well. And then we were not a highly mobile, population, and we were too poor to go to another city. So it was available in my town. And the teacher training institution was there. So, and a lot of people I knew, all my teachers went there. So that was kind of a natural choice.
So, but again, I think you're being very humble, that your first generation collegians, that's a big deal for any family. I hear those stories frequently here, stateside. Oh, I'm the first in my family to go to college. There had to have been something with emphasis and repetition, just kind of instilled. No, the Sidorkin boys are going to college, and you're going to achieve.
Well, with the Soviet Union was a terrible society, dictatorship, and really there was no democracy, no freedom. But one of the few things they did well was the educational accessibility. The quality of education may be questionable, but you can get into college. You didn't have to pay for it. In fact, when I was in college, the government paid me 40 rubles a month as a stipend, just because my grades were B and better. So the access, actually, the kind of barriers, they do provide for better upward social mobility. And in my generation, a lot of us who were first generation in college, there was a huge shift. I was born in '63, so in the late '60s and the '70s, there was this. The higher education was still somewhat selective, but it was not on the basis of your income at all. It was kind of, you do grades. I think in my generation, maybe 20 to 25% of all high school graduates ended up in college, and most of them actually graduated. Their dropout rate was very low. So those, I mean, when you podcast about race and church, so those structural barriers to education, they do matter. Do you have to pay? How do you have to compete? There wasn't very big of difference among the schools. I grew up in kind of working class neighborhood, but our school wasn't that much worse off than anyone in the center of the city where the elites would live. So they were kind of a forced equality. Doesn't work for the society at large. It does work for education, though.
Did you get to select? Were you encouraged to go into the field of education, or was that something that you were just drawn to?
Well, I was, like many kids now, I was interested in history, so I went to be a history teacher, hoping that maybe I'll do more history than teaching. So no, it wasn't. I didn't have a dream of being a teacher when I was young. But I think once you start doing it, teaching is a weird profession. You don't know if you're gonna like it unless you actually try. Some people think they love it, but then they get disappointed quickly. Other people are lukewarm about it, and then they fall into it and they see that they can do it. I suppose it's true for everyone. I mean, how do you know what you can do well unless you actually try to do it, right? So people tend to like things that they do well. So you discover yourself, and of course, if it's easy for you, why not to do it? So that was kind of a.
So for you, was there a point where the light bulb went off, or at what point in the arc of your life, education, career that you're just like, I'm good at this and I like this?
I think you know it about yourself. I don't know if there was a one moment, but you started to go to field experiences, you started to teach a little lessons now and then, you try to communicate with kids, and you realize that you can do it. But also, a lot of teachers are getting a little bit, it's the communication and relationship with kids is a source of energy. We're a vampiric profession, so we like to feed on energy of others.
I like that word, vampiric.
Yeah.
Without the blood, of course.
Yeah. People who get bored easily, they really love to be around kids because there's something different. So yeah, you kind of give, but you also get a lot from it, if you know how. And that's, I think, it feels good. I could always teach. The kids seems to relate to me, most of the kids. So that, you don't need like a lot of conviction. You just kind of find out that it works for you.
Interesting. Share as much as you can or like on your arc that took you across the ocean to here, to not only educate, but to start assuming those leadership roles in schools of education.
I was actually hired to work at the same university I just graduated from as a lowly teaching assistant. And then they decided to send me to graduate school to Moscow from Siberia. So I went to Moscow where I got my first PhD. That didn't do me much good. And then while I was in Moscow, my advisor went for a conference to the US, and she brought an application package from University of Notre Dame. It was paper back then, so I filled it up. And then I moved as a student to University of Notre Dame, got a master's degree, and then I got another PhD in Seattle, Washington, University of Washington. And I guess I'm a risk averse. I never left university since I'm sentenced for life to be at universities
That is,
of different kinds.
you're part of the academy for life.
Yes, yeah. And I'm most likely retire from a university.
Well, there's nothing in and of itself wrong in that. One of the things that that I was noticing on your the information that was posted. If it's incorrect, it's not my fault. It's CSU Sacramento's fault. It says, speaking of Dr. Sidorkin, his teaching and research interests include the concept of dialogic education, the economics of education, innovation, innovative diffusion in education. That's a mouthful, but when you say the economics of education, that is a hot button issue right now, both in terms of debt relief for those that have incurred educational costs, but even just the whole calculus or the whole idea of education, the associated costs, the return on the investment, the societal good, all of those things. Obviously, you can make a career out of this and write books. The book that's coming out is called The Pedagogy of
Relation. Pedagogy of relation.
Of relation. And as you were sharing earlier, that has the thesis or the thrust of the book is how information education is conveyed relationally. Unpack all of that if you can. I know it's a conflation of a lot of stuff, but education, the cost, the relationship, it's kind of like that old, they had, I don't know if you've ever seen it's a training video and they talk about the trip to Abilene. And it's the trip that people go on, and really nobody wanted to go on it, but they ended up going there by default because no one was willing to say or do anything to keep from going to Abilene. Educationally,
because everybody's thought that's the other people wanted.
So educationally, are we in or are we headed to Abilene? Help me out.
Yeah, the story of education is complex. Mass schooling actually appeared as not an economic force. It was established first in Germany, but then very quickly in the United States as well, the public schools.
What year is this, or what century?
It was 1830s.
1830s.
In the north of the country, and then the South got there after the Civil War, mostly. Okay. It was very little. So the massive public education was meant as a sort of a way of kind of integrating the diverse population and making sure the democracy somewhat works, because you have to be able to read and all of that. It didn't really have much of economic necessity, and it was, for many years, it was considered to be like a service you get, right? Okay, you get educated, you feel good about it. In the late 50s of the last century, of 20th century, and between late 50s and the 70s, there was a different theory that emerged. It's called theory of human capital. It's very basic. It's very simple. If you compare people who got education versus people who didn't, you can calculate return on investment by going to school. And what turned out is that education for yourself is actually very, very profitable. It's the best way you can spend your money is I go to college. So because everybody you stay in college, you probably get, I don't know, $150,000 or so more in your lifetime income compared if you didn't. So we all know a lot of exceptions of rich people who dropped out of college and never did it. Don't think about it that way. It's not an anecdotal, it's a statistical evidence. Statistically speaking, you are much, much more likely to get higher income if you went to school, to college, and to graduate school.
Even now?
Even now, and it's true for all countries. We couldn't find, not we, but researchers couldn't find a single country that wouldn't be true for. So there is something to it, and that's sort of thinking about education started to change in the 70s. People thought, oh, it's actually investment. And return on investment, there are two kinds. One is the personal, what do you get out of doing it? Because if you go to college, you forgo some income, right? That's cost. You need to buy books, you need to pay tuition and all of that. So if you take it all out, there's still significant return, better than mutual funds or anything else you could do with your money. But there's also a social return on investment, like public school is free in this country, right? That's a massive taxpayers' money. And they're also very significant. The public return on investments are very good because people who have more education, they make better workers. They work in more advanced industries. They make more money. They pay more taxes. But on top of it, there is what the economists call the spillover effect. They turn out to be healthier. People with education turn out to be better parents. They commit less crime. So if you add all of these benefits, the investment in education actually pays off.
So why then, if it's such a no-brainer, there seems to be either it seems that we're not so readily inclined to invest in public education, right. Or if we are, it seems to be skewed. There seems to be a huge gap between District A
right.
and District B.
Well, yeah, now we're getting close to the mystery here. We know that education, learning outcomes and education results can improve because there is inequality. So some kids get a lot more out of it than others. And there is no reason for that. Biologically, we're not that different. There's no difference between classes, races, social group, immigrant group, and all of that. Kids should be performing at about the same level, right? Because their cognitive ability are very similar. But they don't. And we've known that forever. As long as there was education, we knew that inequality is not based, they're very closely linked to your social status. In the United States, it's race. In other countries, it could be some other marker. So the underclasses, so to speak, perform much less. But they could perform as well. So that's why nobody really doubts that it could be improving, right? Because there's all this potential, all these millions of kids that don't learn as much as they should, right? So there is potential there, and we can't make it work. That's what the frustration is. We've tried that for 50 years. There was all these aims from Head Start on to really kind of equalize the playing field that the kids would come out with about the same skills and the same results, and it doesn't work. If you want my honest opinion, we still don't really understand why. There is a lot of theories, there is a lot of research how it works. It works all the time. Statistically, you're much less likely to succeed in education and in life if you're Black, if you're Hispanic, if you come from a poor family, and all of that. How does it translate exactly? We're not sure. There are many, many theories, from early childhood development differences to language exposure to
zip code. Do I have two parents? Do I have consistency of? Do I have the best teacher at the school I'm going to? It's like I have a teacher, but teacher in District A may be better motivated, equipped, educated than teacher B in the other district. I can only imagine there's an infinite number of inputs that cause. That's why it's hard to understand how you would actually tease that out and say, well, normalized over time and statistically, just kind of is what it is.
Well, yeah, that's the complexity of sort of social sciences, that not one of those factors could be a predictor. Like, for example, the role of a good teacher versus average teacher is not clear to us. We know that if you had two excellent teachers as in the elementary schools in a row, 2 years in a row, then you almost catch up, like kids from sort of poor backgrounds will almost catch up with the other kids. Right, so there's huge influence there, but we don't know what makes a good teacher.
I would agree, and I would probably submit that what makes a good teacher are not necessarily that they got 4.0 in their collegiate exams. That there's an altogether other, and I guess that goes to your point or the thesis of your book. Relational dialogic, or pedagogy relationship.
Yeah, that's my theory, right? So, like many others, I try to crack that problem. Education should be improving, but it doesn't. I just want to be clear. My answer is just one hypothesis amongst many, many others.
I thought you had a crystal ball, doctor.
Yes,
no. Okay, all right. We'll end this podcast now. Okay.
Sorry, I don't. But I suspect that we haven't been missing things because they're hard to see. Like, for example, we've been able to test kids' cognitive ability and their academic achievement for a long time. Pretty good, actually. There's a whole science of testing. And it's missing. It doesn't explain much. So I think because human relationships are very difficult to measure, to see, to observe, the quality of them is not clear. We've been looking, like you're looking for the key where the light is, because we could measure these things. We focused on them because we couldn't measure that this area is in the dark. You're not looking for your lost key there. So that's why I think, in my point of view, that's what happened. I think the secret of good teaching goes to very specific healthy relationship between the teacher and students, and also peer relationships in the schools. And of course, the real task is to see, explain them, and measure them, and actually teach teachers to build those kind of relationships, which is all very huge tasks. We're all at the beginning of that.
If being the dean of education at CSU Sacramento doesn't work out, I think what I just heard, you ought to put yourself out to hire for historically black colleges and universities, because what you just shared took me there, that there's two schools of argument. I don't know, Clark, Atlanta. It's good, but it's not this. But there's an altogether other aspect that we may be overlooking when it comes to historically black colleges and universities, that puts you in a space where you're educated and you're affirmed, you're compelled and propelled. Unlike, and again, I'm a Sac State graduate, master's from University of San Francisco, Fuller Theological Seminary. I can say nowhere along the line did I feel any of the professors was really pulling for Mark Meeks. Maybe it's Fuller. Fuller, definitely. It's a seminary. But Sac State, School of Engineering, if you pass, you pass. If you don't, you don't. Even at the graduate level.
Yes, that's the thing. Some people still believe that. Many of my colleagues, not maybe in my college, but in other colleges, believe that it's, here it is. Math is math. I'll teach it to you if you get it or don't. The rest of it is your problem. It's really a backward way of looking at things, because if you look at the human relation side of things, well, first of all, they're essential for development, right? So when you grow up, it's basically you go through one kind of set of relationships into another. So the primary relation is between the mother and the infant. It could be another adult, but most likely mothers. And if that relationship does not play well, or there are some issues with it, we know that it has an effect for the rest of the life. But then you go into preschool, that's a different adult, you kind of try to use model with your mother, you realize, oh, it's a different kind of adult. Then you go to elementary school, So anyway, if you navigate those, you kind of gradually split your relational experience into different kind of things. And if your journey was healthy, then you should be able to build this relationship for the rest of your life. Now that's where the structural conflict comes in, because if there is a sort of a cultural conflict between your family and the school, teachers are mostly white, your family is black, right? The assumption of a good relationships might be culturally different. And then, of course, we know that for thousands of studies how white teachers may misinterpret the black kids' behavior. They think that they're being argumentative, and in fact, kids can't read the white teacher's code. And anyway, and there's a lot of bias that is subconscious that people demonstrate. So a lot of minority kids, not just black kids, but others, can go through the school when instead of developing the healthy relationship, they accumulate the trauma that's associated with the wrong kind of relationships, right? So, and then of course, like you said, if you end up in historically black institutions, suddenly it doesn't matter for you, right? All this trauma, all the baggage of bad relationship with various people kind of goes away because everybody is sharing the same assumption. So but I think if we just refocus on relationships first and said, look, if you're a teacher, you need to figure out how to relate to your kids first. And then maybe they will teach them something. So, but we used to think about it as very instrumental. You need to good relationships. So they learn that algebra. It's not clear if the algebra is more important in your life than your ability to relate to a person of authority who would be a teacher.
So are you, spoiler alert on your book, I guess, so the last chapter, the last paragraph, do you come with a great conclusion?
Well, I have actually several of them for different audiences. Like if you're a classroom teacher, here's what you should do. Some of the tips and tricks, how do you build healthy relationship with kids. If you're a policymaker, your task is entirely different. If you're, say, a district leader, it's a very different thing. Because from different, education is a huge industry. People play very different roles, and they need to do different things to make that pivot towards relational pedagogy from accountability-based, knowledge-based pedagogy.
Higher education still a good return on the investment? It's +1?
It is still good return on investment, not for everybody, though. Because if you got admitted to college and then you drop out in your second year or so, not only you don't get the benefits, but you also incurred significant debt.
So I have to graduate. And if I graduate,
then you enjoy the return on
all degrees +1?
Either way actually works. You know, it's fairly simple. Like community college will get you something, significant increase. College will give you a more, graduate or professional school even more. But of course, if you break it down, if you get a master's degree in social work, you're not gonna get rich. If you get master's degree in civil engineering, you might.
But maybe not rich, but it is still, if I spend $1 in a graduate program in sociology, over the arc of my life, will I get $1.01 in return?
You, an abstract, you will, but you, individual one, we don't know.
Well, obviously, it's normalized over the population and all that good stuff.
Statistically, you're much likely to get into middle class. I mean, I think that's why I work at CSU in places like that, because CSU is really producer of middle class for the region. It's your teachers, your social workers, it's your nurses, it's your firefighters, your cops, that's that kind of the massive profession.
Don't leave out engineers.
Engineers, yeah. Engineers, computer scientists, art, entrepreneurs, all of these people, they're like the bulk of the economy.
So the theme for today, Sasha, is relationships, it sounds like. And that's probably why I, on a personal level, I resonated with your personality and just you, your wife, very, very warm and welcoming. We couldn't be from I can't imagine unless I was a penguin from Antarctica or something, we could be more different. Western Siberia, Bakersfield,
Right.
European, African American. We couldn't be more different, but there's something to be said about the relationship. And now we're serving on with the Salvation Army Advisory Council, the Community Impact Committee, relationships. Tease that out. I know we're running out of time. I already got the high sign, but relationships. Tease that out, lived out, I guess, is where I'm really going with this.
We actually don't know much about how that works. It's surprising, but we don't. So there's actually a ton of research on student-teacher relationships, and they tend to be very simplistic. They kind of snapshot, here's what good relations are, this is how they impact academic achievement. So the whole premise is that it has to be for something else, I think, is wrong. But that kind of a step-by-step way of how do you build relationship with other people, it's very difficult to teach. We know that some people are better at it than others, but as biological species, we evolved in a certain way, right? Because we were evolved as hunters and gatherers, so we really focused on objects and, fish to kill, to catch, or whatever, tiger to avoid, and all of these things. So we're very much in the outworld. It's about objects and actions. And also, we lived in social groups, right? So there's also a lot of actually very complicated calculations. Who's your friend? Who's your enemy? Who owes you a favor? Who is part of your tribe? Who is not part of your tribe? And it's probably half of our brain capacity is occupied by that. The difference is that we're fully aware of our actions, and we're not aware of maybe 90% of our relational work. So it happens in your subconsciousness, right? That's why it's very difficult to overcome things like racism or other bias or homophobia or something like that. You're not aware you're doing it. You're exhibiting some bias. You don't know you're doing it. Otherwise, somebody would slap you and say, don't do this again, right? It would be easy to fix. But we don't have that. We don't have direct access to our subconsciousness. And of course, you either go through a therapy or whatever. You can actually have access to your own subconsciousness, but it's difficult. So it's the same with teachers. We know there are teachers who are great at relationality. A colleague of mine from Sweden actually recorded it. You can tell this teacher can talk to 4 kids in 5 minutes and have different ways of dealing with each one of them. It's a gift. You ask her, how did you do that? She has no idea she's done it. She doesn't know how she done it. So that's the thing. I mean, some of it you can teach, but some of it, if you can kind of tune up your own self, right? People meditate, people pray, people go through analysis, all of it. So like if you're more in touch with your kind of inner self and you control your biases, then you naturally will be able to build those relationships. So if you're very traumatized, no. If there is a structural conflict between you and the other person, like say black and white in certain situations, it's very hard to overcome. You need to first address the structural things, and then you can let yourself.
Gosh, you got to come back because we got to explore that. So is that aspect of higher education, school, College of Education, CSU Sacramento, is that being taught? Are you preparing instructors, people? Is that a class I can point to and it's like, oh, okay.
You have to understand, I'm dean. I'm not a faculty member. So they see me mostly as a leader and a manager, right? So the fact that I have my own scholarly ideas doesn't readily penetrate. So I can't tell people how to teach because it's really faculty governance.
But do you set the agenda? What's required to obtain a master's or a doctorate from the School of Education? You have to take these courses. You have to, and we, as a matter of fact, we have to have this course, the one you just described.
No. That's not how it works. No.
You're busting my bubble, Sasha.
Faculty have a purview over the curriculum, So I can suggest, actually, many people know what I do, my colleagues, and they support it in various ways. For example, we have a counseling and school psychology programs. They've been aware of importance of relationships for a very long time, as long as their professions exist, but they focus on one-on-one relationship between the therapist or psychologist and a student. So I don't have to convince them, they're already there. Our teacher preparation is so packed of courses because of all the regulations we receive from the state. I can't come to this, say, hey, let's have another course because they will keep kids in school for an extra time.
So in answer to my original question, we're going to Abilene.
No, I believe there is a great arc of scholarship. I'm more of a theory head, a philosopher. Somebody's going to read my book, do more research in relationships, and eventually they will penetrate the practice. It's not going to happen tomorrow, unless this book sells like crazy, which it's not gonna.
After this podcast,
yes,
it's going. It's a skyrocket.
All the millions of you listeners,
That's it. As I've shared with City Church and others, it's not so much the distance you've traveled; it's more important the direction you're going. Right. And so that really is. Right now sounds like we're still going to Abilene, but at least there's one voice that's saying, maybe we ought not go there. Maybe a trip to Bismarck, North Dakota is more appropriate.
Yeah, the thing is with Abilene is that it's not there. We already know that. In the educational policy circles around the world, there's very weird silence. Because everybody was going gung-ho about all this accountability reforms and testing and all of that. And they all did it. All developed countries did something to that. None of them can show anything for it. Billions of dollars were spent from Race to the Top to whatever. Where is the result? Show me the money. So I think there is a search for other solutions. And there are several of them that are being offered. Like, for example, social and emotional learning is a similar concept. However, it shows where to go. It doesn't show how to get there. So I think and other people, I'm not the only one in relational pedagogy. We actually have an international organization from 18 different countries that participate in it. But anyway, our answer, I think, is more practical because you get to the social emotional learning through relationships. But people are searching for other solutions, including the state of California and federal government and everybody else, because the old ones didn't seem to work.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Sidorkin, Sasha, my friend, thank you for entering into this space, and I need to extract a promise that you'll come back.
Thank you. Yes, I'll do my best to come back. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.